socialstudiesgames.us. This is Unit 6, Video 3. As always, it's based on the AP U.S. History guidelines. Here are your learning goals. I can define vertical and horizontal integration, and I can predict the result of monopolies. Vertical integration is when you control all parts of production, and thus you can control the price. We're talking about the types of monopolies that allow you to control all of one thing. We've talked about monopolies in other lessons. I'm going to show you two specific ways in which you can monopolize an industry. We're going to do vertical integration, and this is where you control all parts of production. On the screen is a rock, more specifically iron ore. You take iron ore or these rocks and you melt them. This is called the Bessemer Process. You turn it into liquid steel. Then you can turn the liquid steel into anything you want. During this time in American history, steel was very important. Steel's still important today, very much important then, and it made the railroads, which we talked a lot about, how important those are. You needed steel to do railroads, and every giant size skyscraper, all the buildings were made from steel. So if you had those rocks and you could melt them, you could make a lot of money. Andrew Carnegie vertically integrated this process. Here's how it works. Vertical and horizontal integration. Vertical, you can buy from yourself at the lowest price, and then you can charge the consumer less. Once you charge the consumer less, you run out your competition, and then you're all by your own to jack the price up again. You're like, wait, what? I don't get it. Buy from yourself, the lowest possible price. Huh? Don't worry, kids. I'll slow it down for you. So we're worried about vertical integration. You can see it on the screen here, and I'm going to show it here. So imagine business A. And in business A, this guy sells his steel to the railroad at $10 a pop. How did he come up with this price? Well, it cost him $1 to mine the rocks out of the ground. It cost him another $5 to ship the rocks to his factory. And then it cost him another $3 to melt the iron ore rocks into steel. $9 total. The lowest he could possibly charge and make a profit was $10. So he had to pay a guy to get the rocks, pay a guy to ship, and then he had to pay the cost to melt the stuff down. There it is. That's how it works. And that's any business. You can take any business if you're a farmer, and you can go through the steps of, well, I had to buy food for my animals. Then I had to slaughter my animals. Sorry about that step. Then I had to ship my animals. Maybe I had to, there's steps in the process for every single thing in which you create a final product. What Carnegie does is, instead of buying from a guy to do every single one of these, he mines the rocks himself, he ships the rocks himself, he melts the rocks himself, and that way he can lower the price. Instead of paying a guy to do that, or paying a guy to do this, or paying a guy to do that, he does them all himself, charges himself the lowest possible price, so that way he keeps his costs down. So then at the end, he can sell steel to the railroad, or he can sell steel to the guy building skyscrapers at the lowest possible price. Now, obviously, this is going to hurt because he's not making that much money through these, but there is a big picture plan. As long as he can keep selling at $4, everyone is going to buy from him. And eventually, that's going to force this guy out of business because no one is going to buy your $10 steel. And there's nothing he can do. $10 is the lowest he could possibly do because he's got to pay him and pay him and pay him. There's no way he could charge less. Meanwhile, Carnegie can hide his losses throughout these different businesses and hang on for a little while. And then once that guy's out of business, he no longer has any competition. And if you want to buy steel, you got to buy it from Carnegie. And oh, by the way, it's $20 now. So he took a loss early, and he was able to take a loss because he controlled it. This guy couldn't say, I'm only going to pay you $1. Well, then you're not using my train. It's my train, not your train. Carnegie could take those losses because he owned all of the parts. This guy did not own all the parts, so he had to pay whatever price, and then he had to raise his rates in the end. Carnegie could take that initial loss, run him out of business, and then jack the price up. And that's how you create a vertically integrated monopoly. You see this to a certain extent still today. A perfect example of a vertically integrated monopoly. Now, these aren't technically not illegal, is McDonald's. McDonald's owns its own farms. McDonald's owns its own trucks to ship the food to the place. McDonald's owns its own restaurants. So McDonald's owns just about every step in the process. Same thing with Walmart. Walmart controls a lot of the factories where the goods are made. Walmart controls the trucks that then ship the goods. Walmart owns the stores. They control each part of the process. That's vertical integration. Andrew Carnegie, the guy that just did that, now he's not an evil person. Well, whatever. He's not an evil person. He made money. He was smart. We shouldn't demonize him. But if you do want to demonize him, not so fast. He also came up with the idea of the social gospel. Or is it the social gospel or the gospel of wealth? He was the gospel of wealth, actually. And what he said was, look, if you make a bunch of money, you can't take it to the grave with you. You need to give it back to public works, universities, hospitals, give it back to the people. Now, unfortunately, that idea has morphed into the social gospel today, whereas in the past, if you got rich, you were kind of expected it would be nice for you to give back. Now that's morphed into, well, we're not all rich, so we can't do that. That's not cool. So what we do is we want the government to do that. The social gospel is the idea that we are going to politic and force the government to give money to help people out. So they've kind of destroyed this idea of the gospel of wealth, which was connected to Christianity and helping people out, to now that the new religion is, no, the government is supposed to help people out. And that's definitely not what this guy intended. His idea was if you get really wealthy, you can't take the money with you, you should help people out. He didn't think that you need to force the government to spend other people's money to help other people out. That is a perversion of the gospel of wealth. But nonetheless, here we are today. Let's talk about the other type of integration. So we did vertical, which was up and down. And here's an example. If you wanted to vertically integrate the oil industry, that means you would have to control the oil pumping. You have to get it out of the ground and the mining, and then drilling. Then you would also have to control transportation of the oil. You have to control the refining of oil, again, the other transportation of the oil, and then the direct sales to the customer. You would have to do all those if you want to vertically integrate oil production. Rockefeller will horizontally integrate the oil industry. He will gain control of the refining process. He will pick one step and he will completely take control of the entire 95%, which is basically all of it. So if you wanted to refine your oil in the United States, you had to come to him. At first, it wasn't just him. It was Rockefeller and competitors. And what happened was Rockefeller was able to lower his prices. And when he lowered his prices, other people couldn't compete. And then he would buy their refinery and he would lower his prices. And it got so low that other people could not compete. And he would buy more. And he would slowly but surely force out his competition to the point that he owned 95% of the refineries. Well, how did he do this? Well, there's a couple ways. The first thing that he did was, and this was just pretty simple, when he shipped his oil, instead of shipping it in barrels, he shipped it in large tankers, like you'll see right here. He was the first person to say, well, instead of all these just random barrels, it would be actually cheaper to put them into large tankers, which we take for granted. Whenever you see oil or gas being shipped on the highway and semis, it's in those large tankers. He was the first person to do that. But more importantly, here's the trick that Rockefeller didn't just like, I'm just going to lower prices. You just can't just lower prices. You have to have a way to lower prices. Otherwise, someone else would have done it. You have to be inventive. You have to be innovative. You have to come up with new ideas. So the principal use of petroleum or oil at the time was to produce kerosene for lamps. This was before electricity. This was before the automobile. So the oil that we were using, mainly, pretty much they were only using was the kerosene that they were getting from this oil for lamps. There wasn't any electricity. There was no use for any of the other byproducts. So when the petroleum was refined, they would refine it. They would clean up the petroleum or the oil to get the kerosene. Gasoline was a byproduct. It was so little valued that some oil companies simply poured it into a river and got rid of it. So you get the oil out of the ground, and inside the petroleum, there's a bunch of different fuels that you can use. At that time, the only one that they really valued was kerosene for lamps. This is before electricity. This is before automobiles. You had no use for the gasoline. And so a lot of the oil companies and these refineries were just dumping it out. Rockefeller looked into that. He hired scientists to create numerous new products from petroleum, ranging from paint to paraffin to anesthetics to Vaseline. If you got Vaseline, petroleum jelly, that comes from oil from the ground. He hired scientists to find out, hey, look, I'm pouring all this byproduct. We're using the kerosene. There's got to be another use for this other stuff so we can sell it instead of just throwing it away. He figured that out. And he used the gasoline. He found a use for the gasoline. He used it in the production process. He used the gasoline to fuel the processing instead of just throwing it away. Kerosene was still the principal product of petroleum, but because Standard Oil, which was his company, did not have to recover all its production costs from the sale of kerosene, it was able to sell the kerosene much cheaper. He didn't have to jack the price up on kerosene because he didn't have to make so much money on kerosene because now he's making money on petroleum jelly. He wasn't wasting the gasoline. He was using the gasoline to lower his production costs. He was selling the other type. He was able to sell the byproducts. And by selling those, he was making money there. He could lower his price on kerosene. And by lowering his price on kerosene, he drove all these other guys out of production. It wasn't just simple him making something up and I'm going to lower prices. He had to think of an idea, a way. He had to come up with an invention to do this. And he did it. And that's why he was able to get rich. He saw something that no one else was doing. That's how you get rich in this country. That's how you become successful. You think of what other people have not thought of. It seems obvious now. But yeah, so does Google. Seems obvious now. So does Facebook. Seems obvious now. YouTube, of course. Yeah, of course people want to be able to sit in front of a computer and watch videos all day. Yeah, I could have thought of that, but you didn't. So what's the next big thing? That's what you should think about. Maybe you come up with it, but maybe you don't. But you always got to kind of keep your mind active to be that person. That was Nelson Rockefeller. And of course, obviously, after he runs all the people out, he raises his prices, gets filthy rich. All right, Andrew Carnegie. So we're talking about Andrew Carnegie and the Gospel of Wealth. And one of the things that Carnegie was doing, because decided he was going to give it all away, he did give it all away. And you can't really give away railroads. And remember, he owns a lot of railroads. He owns a lot of everything. At the end, he wants to just give his stuff away, build hospitals and school. Well, you can't give away a railroad. You give away money. So he sells his railroads and then gives away that money. Well, in the process, we got a bit of an issue because he sells all of his railroads off to these guys. We kind of call them robber barons, but unfortunately, what's going to happen is we're going to create another monopoly here. Now, it's good because he builds hospitals and schools and it's part of the gospel of wealth, but we got a guy here that's going to try to horizontally integrate transportation. And they're pretty close, right? They buy these railroads from Carnegie. Like, all right, if we can just control all the railroads, and if you want to ship goods, then you got to ship them through us. But they're not quite there. They're able to purchase a lot of the railroads, but not all the railroads. I think we're talking about J.P. Morgan is in on this. Is that J.P. Morgan? Yeah. You know him today from Chase Bank. But J.P. Morgan builds a monopoly by monopolizing the railroads. How does he do it? Well, first step is to buy a lot of the railroads from Carnegie when he's tossing them away. The second thing is the Panic of 1893, which we talked about in the video before. People were buying and selling. They were investing in the railroads. We talked about before how railroads, this is a great way to make money because you got to use railroads. Everyone needs railroads. I want to own a part of the railroad. That's easy money. Well, the problem is they built too many railroads. Talked about this in the video before. The supply of the railroads went sky high. The competition between the railroads ended up driving the price down. That meant the railroad company wasn't making any money when they were charging you to ride on the railroad. The railroad company wasn't making hardly any money when they were charging people to ship their corn. That was because the price had dropped so much because there was too much competition between different railroad companies competing for your purchase of a ticket or your purchase of using them to ship goods. And as their price dropped, they weren't making any money. The railroads started to go bankrupt. You go bankrupt or you go out of business when you can't sell tickets anymore. You go out of business when you sell tickets, but you're not selling the tickets for a high enough price. And that's what happened. The railroads just started to go out of business because they couldn't make any money. They couldn't charge enough for you to ride on the railroad. They couldn't charge enough for you to ship their goods because they had built too many railroads. The supply was too high.